The Pittsburgh Penguins' next move has been revealed as multiple insiders are reporting that the Penguins are moving off of not only one, but Kyle Dubas is planning to move off of two star players on this team. We're going to break down exactly what this means for the team moving forward and the return coming back to the team, because one thing is for sure, everything is about to change for the Pittsburgh Penguins. We're going to break it all down in this episode of Penguins Digest. But before we do that, a quick reminder to hit that subscribe button. About 68% of you who watch these videos are not subscribed to the channel. So if you want to stay up to date with everything that's happening with the Penguins, go down below, hit that free subscribe button. And again, this is the place to be for all your daily Pittsburgh Penguins content. But Nikash, let's get right into it. There's a lot to get into today because there's two players that look like they're on the way out, and both of those players are Bryan Rust and Ricard Raquel. And now I had a video, a couple days ago talking about this, but there have been some developments, and the fact that the Penguins are taking calls on both of them right now and could be moving out not just one, but actually both of them. And that's what we're going to break down in this video. Now, there's a lot of teams like the Toronto Maple Leafs that could be interested in a Bryan Rust type player. Some of the fans over there are talking about that and what it could cost, and the fact that Kyle Dubas would like almost all of his prospects that he helped draft and develop back in return for a guy like Bryan Rust. So that could be interesting for the Penguins. But, does it make sense to trade both of them right now? That's something I want to start with because, we'll get into where they could go, how this could make sense in a second. But, Bryan Rust, there's a lot being made out of this because his no movement clause is up on his contract, right? He had it until July 1st of this year, no longer has it. He's heading into year 4 of 6 on his deal. He makes it very friendly at this point in time with where the cap is going, $5.1 million for a guy who scored 31 goals last season. So we can start with Rust, and I guess Raquel too. He makes $5 million. Like, they're on very similar contracts that are very affordable for teams. Obviously, they're both kind of in the same age range. Bryan Rust is 33. Ricard Raquel is 32. Raquel coming off of a career season. What do you think? Should they even move off of one of them? Should they move off both of them? Like, what do you think at this point?
Well, Darius, I think the question is, I'll throw this back to you very quickly.
Yeah.
Who is supposed to go first overall come June?
It is Gavin McKenna.
And that is why you trade both of them, because the Pittsburgh Penguins, they need a top 5, top 4 draft pick. And they're not going to make the playoffs. They're not going to be close to the playoffs again. And I know we all want to talk about Sidney Crosby and what's going to happen with Malkin and Letang and all these guys. Yep. The easiest guys to move off are Raquel and Rust, in my opinion. I thought it was super surprising that a guy like Ricard Raquel was not traded at the trade deadline, given how strong of a season he was. Yep. And that teams were in the looking for wingers. I believe he can play center in a pinch, but he's more of a winger, of course. But guy had it. I think what it was, 35 goals last year, 35 assists. And the only thing with Raquel is I thought they should have moved him because he did shoot 17% last year, which is like 6 above his career average, which is crazy. But talking more about Bryan Rust, I think he's the perfect player for any team to acquire. I think the Leafs that you brought up are a perfect match for him. I know that tweet kind of did say, let's trade for him but not give up anything good. Right. I think that's how like all fans kind of react to, like, oh, like I really like this player, but like I don't want to trade anything that I like on my team. Bryan Rust, he's really known for riding shotgun with Sidney Crosby over the past however many years. Very huge in those cup finals runs, as you can see right there. McGrody, Crosby, and Rust could be a first line. Rust makes too much sense to be traded. Like you said, the no move cost being done opens up a lot of avenues for him. He does not really control his destiny. We all know Kyle Dubas likes to do right by his players, so maybe he'll do Rust a solid and pick a more favorable destination for him. But yeah, man, I think Bryan Rust moving on makes too much sense. He's a UFA in 2028. He's already 33 years old, and with the cap going up, that 5.13 average annual value is insanely good for any team that might be acquiring him. And I think if you're a playoff team that's trying to make another run, Bryan Rust, for me, is someone that you should go and get. And I think the Penguins are going to dominate the trade market. There's not a lot of teams who are looking to sell and move off players right now. That usually changes as we get closer to, the Christmas time of the season. Yeah. But we're not there yet, and the Penguins are willing to sell. I think teams should be calling, and Kyle Dubas can really drive that number up for Bryan Rust and Ricard Raquel as, we get into the dog days of the offseason in the late Julys and early August here.
Definitely, yeah. And I'm going to take the other side of it, actually. I do think, and I want to get into it in a second, that Raquel is actually the guy to trade, and you should actually hang on to Bryan Rust. But I'll get into that in a second. I wanted to further your point with some stats. But this first, I wanted to jump on this, that Kyle Dubas is expected to be aggressive on the trade market soon. And clearly that hasn't really happened. So this is still going to happen, which I think can be very exciting. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with that, and if it is a trade heavy offseason like mentioned here. So we'll see what happens with that. But to get back to my point, Ricard Raquel, I think he's the guy to trade. If you look at both, listen, like they make almost essentially the same. Like Bryan Rust makes $100,000 more than Ricard Raquel, and their contracts are essentially exactly the same. Year 4 of 6 of their contracts. The reason that I think Raquel is the guy that you trade is because Bryan Rust was there through all the cup runs, all of those things. He has the experience. He's a little bit older. He puts, I think, Sidney Crosby in his happy place a little bit. You don't want to, ruffle the feathers too much when it comes to Sidney Crosby when moving players out. And obviously they have a whole new coaching staff coming in next year too, which is something, we've covered on the channel, but it is something that's going to be a major factor. So I feel like you hang on to Bryan Rust, but to me, Raquel, he's only been there for a little bit. Like you mentioned, like I was shocked that he wasn't traded at the trade deadline. There was so much noise about that at the trade deadline. And he had a career year last year. Like it doesn't actually get better for Ricard Raquel than it was last season. Like he can help another team tremendously. So with that cap hit, I think it's going to be very interesting. But like Pierre LeBrun, mentions here, plenty of teams are calling on Bryan Rust and Ricard Raquel. Very similar contracts, could make some sense. The Ottawa Senators are actually linked to Ricard Raquel, and I wanted your thoughts on this too. Could that make sense for Ottawa? I feel like with the cap, I mean the Penguins can take on anything at this point, right? Mm-hmm. So they have a lot of flexibility in that way, and Kyle Dubas has set them up very well in that way that they can take on a lot of dead cap if they need to make a move like this, to take on younger assets that they can then either flip or develop themselves. But what's your take on this? Could this make sense for does this make sense for the Ottawa Senators, and should the Penguins even look at trading Ricard Raquel?
I think this does make sense for the Senators, and from the Penguins' point of view, I think any team makes sense for them as long as they want Raquel or Rust and they are willing to put up the right offer. For me, for the Sens, they have kind of been making buy-ish now moves. They a couple years ago they did make that Jacob Chikrin trade, the Alistair Brinkat trade. Those were a little bit premature given where they were at. So they eventually had to trade both players. But even then, they just swapped Josh Norris for Dylan Cousins. That was a big trade for them. And I think they did go down 3-0 to the Maple Leafs in the first round, but they did have some fight in them. It was interesting to see Brady Tkachuk in his first year in the Stanley Cup playoffs. So I think adding a Ricard Raquel, they do have some first round picks in the future they could give up, and I think Raquel is a guy who could kind of come in and cement that forward group. I don't hate it at all for them. I don't know what the Penguins are looking for in terms of prospects and picks. Given the Penguins really do need that. I don't think they're looking for roster players or impact players at this point. So I honestly do like this. And from my point of view, this is fine for the Sens. But for me, for the Penguins, just look for pretty much any team that wants them and is willing to give up the most value. We're talking about, does this make sense? Is this a fit? If you are a team that is calling about Ricard Raquel and I'm Kyle Dubas, you make sense for Ricard Raquel, because I want all your prospects and I want all your draft picks.
And again, like I mentioned, off the top, if you look at his contract, $5 million in the current climate of the league, where so many guys are going to be making $10 million, where they're kind of like 80-point guys at this point. It's not like superstar money anymore. $5 million for a guy who just had a career year, put up 35 goals, like really not bad at all, right? So nope. Very, very good value. But like you said, he bounced back last season as well. He didn't have the greatest season. He was kind of like, kind of middling as well. And he bounced back with a really tremendous season last year, and a bad year for the Penguins. Let's call it what it is, right? Like it was a really, really bad year, and the goaltending wasn't there. But Kyle Dubas has made some interesting moves heading into this season. He got Mantha now to kind of back up a couple of the guys. He dealt with some injuries last season, but he's kind of shored up some areas. What you have in your goaltending at this point, kind of waiting, I think, for Jari's contract to expire at this point, but he's added some depth on defense. So it's going to be an interesting season. I would imagine some of the young guys are going to fight for spots on this team too, like McGroarty. Like I think he's going to be an everyday NHLer at this point. Koivunen, we saw at the end of last season, he could be an everyday NHLer. We'll see. But like I mentioned, they have a ton of cap space. They can take on a lot. If you're, throwing $5 million out the door in Ricard Raquel or a Bryan Rust, you can take on a ton of cap space in return if the other team needs to free it up, right? So Kyle Dubas has them in a pretty good spot right now, and I don't think that they're necessarily competing next season. I feel like they do want to get Sidney Crosby back to the playoffs, but let's be honest, I don't think the Pittsburgh Penguins are competing next year. So it's going to be interesting to see what they end up doing with Bryan Rust. But Nikash, any final thoughts on, is it Bryan Rust? Is that the guy that you trade? Ricard Raquel? I feel like, it makes sense to... I don't think you should move off both of them personally, but I think that it could make some sense certainly to move off one of them.
Well, I think you do move on both of them. I mean, I know you talked about like pleasing Sidney Crosby and stuff, and like bringing Crosby back to the playoffs. Nobody wants to hear it, but you know how you bring Sidney Crosby back to the playoffs? You trade him to a different team. So, if we're trying to not ruffle some feathers, I think the Penguins need to ruffle some feathers, and maybe Sidney Crosby, will stop being so noble and actually want to get traded to a team and go back to the Stanley Cup playoffs. Because I'll tell you one thing, Darius, the Stanley Cup playoffs are a lot more fun when Sidney Crosby is in the mix. No matter how good the team is, the Penguins haven't made the playoffs in a while or have been like super impactful in the playoffs in a while. So I would love to see Sidney Crosby back in the playoffs. And I think, Penguins fans, I think Sidney Crosby can net you a big return, but that obviously is a question for a video maybe down the line. So me personally, I think Bryan Rust and Ricard Raquel are prime trade candidates. In an offseason where there's not going to be a lot of major impact players on the trade market, I think they should definitely move on from both of them.
Yeah, and ruffle the feathers would that's definitely the term for that if they were to trade Sidney Crosby. And I do have a conspiracy theory, I will say. I see you guys in the comments, all of that, appreciate it, Penguins fans, but like, when you think about it, I think, at times Kyle Dubas is making some moves to maybe see if, Sidney Crosby goes, maybe I do want to leave. But I do appreciate what Crosby's doing and the fact that he wants to wear that Penguins logo for his entire career. So we'll see how long that goes on. And I think there is a world where they can bring the team back, but how competitive are they going to be in the playoffs if they do go back before Sidney Crosby turns 40, let's say, because he's not getting any younger. So we'll see what Kyle Dubas has up his sleeve. It's very, very interesting in Pittsburgh. Let us know how you feel in the comments, but if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with everything Pittsburgh Penguins.